Please welcome to the stage Axios transportation correspondent Joann Muller.
Well, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to remind you that you can follow along today's conversations on Axios social networks using the hashtag What's Next Summit. I'm really happy to kick off the conversation now with our next guest, who is the CEO of United Airlines. Please help me welcome to the stage Scott Kirby. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Joann. How are you?
Good to see you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I came here on an airplane. I suspect you did too. And anybody in this audience who flies on an airplane now usually gets a notice as they're booking, a reminder of what their decision to fly, what impact that will have on the environment.
Yeah.
Obviously, aviation's a huge contributor to climate change. I'm curious, as the CEO of United Airlines, one of the biggest airlines in the world, can we innovate ourselves out of this problem, or are people going to have to change their behavior like some of the biggest climate activists have, which is they don't fly anymore?
Well, first, I think it's important to say that we have to innovate our way out of it, and if we do, and changing our behavior is a bad way to do it. And I said this first at COP26. I was following someone on stage who got up and kind of apologized for flying to COP26, and this was in November of 2021, and said that one of the underappreciated casualties of COVID was the loss of global perspective, and that the world had become a more dangerous place because we weren't seeing each other in person anymore. And United Airlines used to carry 1,000 U.S. citizens to China every day and 1,000 Chinese citizens to the U.S. And we used to carry 100 U.S. citizens to Russia and 100 Russian citizens to the U.S. every single day. And at the time I said, and that's made the world more dangerous because all that perspective, those are bridges that when things start happening around the world, there's lots of contact back and forth, and we can, we may not agree on everything, but we can at least understand each other's perspective, and we don't understand it anymore. And that turned out to be sadly prophetic. And so we live in a global community. We're social creatures. We need to be able to connect people, unite the world. And so travel is a critical part of not just the economy, but I think of creating a safer globe. But we should do it sustainably. And United is in one of those hard to decarbonize industries. Aviation's about 2.5% of global emissions, but hard to decarbonize. And so we'll probably talk more about it today. But SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and carbon capture is another one that we all, I think, need to talk about instead of offsets. But carbon capture is really critical for all of the hard to decarbonize industries. And there's a big chunk of emissions. It's not just aviation. Steel, concrete, the food that you eat, that aren't going to be decarbonized 100% at the source. And so we've got to find ways, and I think carbon capture is a big part of that story as well.
Well, let's talk about that. So what is United doing? You have a lot of initiatives. Is it throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what works?
Yeah, so we're doing more than any other airline in the world. We really are the global leader, and in a lot of ways, I think more than almost any company in the world. Part of that is, one, I think this is personally, think that sustainability and climate change is the most important issue for our generation to solve for our children and the generations that are going to come after us. And so we're really are focused on real solutions. We don't think of this as a marketing function, and we're trying to get real solutions. Our commitment to sustainable aviation fuel today is about equal to all the rest of the world's airlines combined around the world.
Right, but it's still...
okay, but we can talk about that. Because you got to build these industries, and SAF is an industry that has to be built. It doesn't happen overnight, just like wind and solar didn't happen overnight. 25 years ago, they were this, and today they're this. And the same thing can and needs to happen with SAF, but we're a leader there. But the other thing that I think sets United apart from companies is we've got a commitment to be 100% green, and that is different than the traditional net zero commitments that you hear from others. And what we mean by 100% green is we're not going to use traditional carbon offsets to get there. And to me, this is the most, if we're going to solve climate change as a globe, it is perhaps the most important point to make. And
So not just planting trees.
you can't, and the problem, there's nothing wrong with planting trees, but the problem with planting trees is, first, 99% of those projects are fraud. They're not real. I mean, they're unintentional fraud. People think they're doing the right thing, but they're trees that were never going to be cut down. They're timing about when the trees get cut down. They're trees that were going to grow anyway. But the bigger issue is it's not scalable. If we planted every square inch of the planet that could grow trees and could make them mature overnight, it's less than 5 months of mankind's mission, and then you're done. And the problem with it is, if you go look at the companies that say they're getting to net zero, 99% of them are relying on carbon offsets. And if relying on carbon offsets, I mean, it might be 1% of the solution, but it's at most 1% of the solution. And if that's what everyone is defaulting to, and they're defaulting to it because it's the easy and cheap thing to do. It's cheap, by the way, because it's not real. And that's why it's cheap.
So what are the ways that we innovate then to
So
solve
there's
this
lots of
problem?
innovation happening, on the supply side, whether it's renewable energy, SAF for us. There's a lot of innovation happening there. But ultimately, I think we have to figure out how to do something with carbon. We're not going to get to a world where there's no carbon being produced. Society, I mean, we're going to have concrete, we're going to have steel, we're going to still need to eat food. And all of those things produce carbon. And I am of the view that carbon capture and either using the carbon or ultimately sequestering some of it, I think are going to be critical. In fact, later today, we're going to have another announcement of another investment we've made. I think we're waiting until after this forum, but it's called Savante, which we're really excited about. We think they have the best technology for carbon capture that anyone has created so far. They're about making the picks and shovels to make carbon capture work. And then you can use it. We can use it to create SAF. You can use it for all kinds of things.
So you capture
to have
the
a circular
carbon.
net zero, you capture the carbon, use that carbon to make jet fuel instead of using, oil out of the ground.
Wow. All right. And you're investing in this company?
We are investing in that. Another thing that United has done that's unique is we've made a number of investments in companies, but I think most importantly, we've got this fund that we've launched, United Ventures Fund, that we're allowing partners and customers to invest in. And so much of what companies do when they're, if you go back to booking your flight, they'll give you the ability to buy a carbon offset at the end. And a lot of companies do that, buy a carbon offset. But for aviation, we have to increase the supply. Going off, it might make people feel good to go pay for a carbon offset of some sort. But unless we increase the supply, you're right. Today, it's a minuscule amount of SAF that's produced. We have to change the amount of supply if we're going to make a difference. So it's first of its kind that I know of any industry, not just in aviation, where instead of just buying SAF, we're taking the money to invest in companies that are building the industry. They're at the startup stage, and giving them the startup capital to go develop the technology and to do the R&D, and see which paths work and can scale to commercial size and grow the industry. And to me, we're just really, and I'm a climate change geek, we're on the same path that wind and solar were on. If you went back and read the literature from 25, 30 years ago, people would have said about wind and solar, it can never work because it can never be cost competitive with fossil fuels. And today it's cheaper. And it's cheaper because there were government support, which the Inflation Reduction Act provided some of the same kinds of parallel kinds of support, was really important. But that drove investment in the space, and the cost to produce a solar cell is 97% lower than it was, 25 years ago. Same for wind, gigawatt of wind power. And you drove down the cost. And we need to do the same thing with SAF. We can do it, but where we are at SAF is where wind and solar were 20 or 25 years ago.
Now, you're also investing in electric flight, hydrogen. It seems that you are sort of placing a lot of bets all at once. Do you anticipate that all of them are going to make it through and become part of our lives, or are you trying to figure out which one's going to be the winner?
We don't think that everything that we're investing in is going to be successful. We don't know for sure which ones are. I mean, it's much like the venture world. We're hoping to hit some home runs and recognize that we'll have some that don't work. Because we're in the early stage of the investment in terms of trying to predict 20 years from now what's going work, I think is a fool's errand, and better to make a lot of bets and then put more money in when you see the ones that are working. SAF is the biggest thing that we're focused on. We are doing work with electric and hydrogen. Electric and hydrogen, however, electric is, I think, going to play an important role in short haul, small aircraft kind of service, autonomous service. In some ways, replace helicopters, maybe replace, roads, or maybe replace cars, from downtown Manhattan, from Manhattan out to the airport, or from downtown San Francisco. But the energy density of batteries is not nearly high enough to fly even medium-sized airplanes, medium distances. And there's no even theoretical battery technology that can power airplanes, big airplanes, long distances. And hydrogen has high energy density, but you need about triple the volume to get the same energy. So I joke with people, we'll just take a couple more inches of legroom away from you to put some hydrogen on the airplane. So hydrogen is maybe someday, but it probably requires, if you look at the designs for hydrogen, they're flying wings. They look like the B-2 bomber instead of traditional airplanes. Also, I believe there's lots of issues with, making sure you can safely fly an airplane with liquid nitrogen, the temperature that you have to have hydrogen at to power it. And, you're 3 hours away from the nearest airport over the North Pole somewhere. I think there's going to be some pretty big challenges with hydrogen. So for the foreseeable future, it's traditional airplanes, and that's how you get to SAF. Is the answer because it has the highest, it has energy density that works and volumes requirements that works. We got to drive SAF.
So sustainable aviation fuel, you say it's going to take 10 to 20 years, perhaps. I guess I don't know if we have that much time. I mean, what do you do in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, we have to take the time to do it. You have to build the industry. I mean, it's important. You've got to build the infrastructure to make it work. The Inflation Reduction Act was really, really important in this. One of the challenges that we have for SAF is it's about feedstock, and and pre-IRA, to some degree, it's still true. But if you have feedstock to produce fuel from something other than oil, you could produce renewable diesel or ethanol, and you get big government credits to do that. So, of course, anyone is going to use their feedstock to produce those products because you get paid more to do it, and that's where all the feedstock was going. It still goes. We produce 17 billion gallons today of those products in the country. Those are all power vehicles that can be electrified. Road transport can be electrified. And so what the Inflation Reduction Act does is get aviation fuel closer to an equal footing so that that feedstock can be used to produce fuel for aircraft that can't be powered by other sources. And so, look, we're starting. You have to start. And it'd be great if we just started 20 years ago, but we didn't. You got to start, and the only way to get there is to start, but to be realistic about it too, and like trying to pretend it's going to happen tomorrow. It's not. And we often make, I think, in this community, we make things worse by, wanting to get to you can't get to the perfect answer tomorrow. And if you try, you make it worse. And look, the world, it's important to recognize that the world isn't just going to accept wholesale changes to their lifestyle. And to me, the perfect example of this was what happened with the war in Ukraine, 13 months ago. Every Western government that has been big on climate change, 100% of them rushed to insulate their consumers from high prices. If you want to lower the volume of fossil fuels, raise the price. It works. 100% of them, whether it was releasing oil from the SPR, the cap on natural gas prices is in Europe, like 100% of them did it. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And if we're going to make a difference in climate change, we have to make the investments that aren't necessarily tomorrow going to pay off, but that are going to pay off in the long term.
I want to switch gears a little bit because there's another topic that I think a lot of people who fly might be concerned about, and that is what seems like a rash of near misses on runways, many of them, some of them anyways, involving United planes. How concerned are you about that, and what should be done?
Well, first, I'd say we continue to have by far not just the safest aviation system in the world, but the aviation system compared to the next safest industry is probably 100 times. The standards are probably literally 100 times safer, and all of us in aviation have that in our core and our DNA, and are really proud of that. And all these incidents, the system have worked as designed. To avoid, turning a near miss into an accident. So we should be proud of that. That said, I think it has become clear to many of us, really almost all of us in the industry, that it's important to do even more and to constantly elevate the safety standards. So, the fact that we're all talking about it, that we're working with the FAA on it, that's the first step. That's really important. I can tell you at United, we've got a list of 20-something things that we have changed just in the last 7 or 8 months, including adding an extra day of training for new hires, making sure that all of our pilots come in for training at least every 9 months. The FAA requirement is 12 months. We bring 100% of them in every 9 months. We've added a day of training for new hire, an extra day for new hires. We've added extra time for upgrades. So when people are upgrading from fleets, extra training when they do that. We've added a full in-person day. To my knowledge, we're the only airline in the country that does it. There may be others. I know there's some that don't. We call it professional development training for pilots that we do in person. In a schoolhouse. There's a whole lot of things like that I think we can and should do and are doing.
When you think about the future of aviation, it's not just more people flying, right? Demand is high, but you also have soon lots and lots of drones, potentially some of these eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. You've got more rockets going up into space almost every week. Do you believe that air traffic control is funded enough properly for today's level of aviation, the things that are flying in the sky?
It absolutely is not. The FAA absolutely, unequivocally needs more funding, more people. This is not a criticism of the FAA. This has been building for 20 to 30 years.
It's Congress that needs to appropriate more money.
It's all of us, that need to do it. And, we had the FAA's budget in real terms is smaller than it was 20 years ago. There's fewer air traffic controllers today than there were 30 years ago, despite the massive growth in the system. What's really happened at the FAA is every kind of budget, they get whacked a little bit, and they've been asked to take over responsibility for drones. They've been asked to do space launches. They've got, in the aftermath of the MAX disaster, thousands of people committed to much higher standards on regulatory and safety programs with aircraft certification and delivery. And effectively, that has all come out of the front line. And we just don't have enough controllers. I can guarantee you this weekend, flights to Florida will have air traffic control delays, even if the weather is perfectly good. It's every weekend now. And the FAA is doing something later today about New York, which is really, really good. They're going to try to limit capacity, but without limiting capacity, the airports can't fly their full capacity in New York because there's not enough air traffic controllers.
And that's a big market for you.
It's a big market, and it's just without question a big issue. A lot of what I'm doing here in DC is spending time talking to people about that. I think there's largely consensus on it that this is infrastructure for the country. And just like we had an infrastructure bill, you need to build roads, bridges, like building a extra runway, if you don't have enough air traffic controller, is just a waste of money. And it's a pretty straightforward investment case that we need to invest in more resources for, but also technology. The NOTAM issue is just the tip of the iceberg of the challenges. And again, it's not their fault. When you haven't had the money and you have 35-year-old systems, that's what's going to happen.
All right, we're almost out of time, but this whole summit is focused on what's next. So I would love you to look into your crystal ball and tell me what flying is going to be like 10 to 20 years from now. My trip from my house to the airport, including my check-in, my baggage, and getting through security.
Yeah.
What kind of technology? What's it going to be like?
Well, the core of it, I think, is in 10 to 20 years. I hope I'm not being a Luddite, but I think it's going to look largely the same as it does today. You're going to get on an airplane. The airplane's going to
What's next? Nothing.
the airplane's going to look like it looks today. But I think it is, and will continue to get the customer experience and the ease will get better and better and better. A lot of what we're doing a lot at United. I think we're better than anyone at communicating with customers about what's going on. Letting you pre-order meal, whether it's pre-ordering meals or trying to be transparent when there are delays about what's happening. And I think that's going to expand further and further. I had some of the conversations I have when we talked about FAA reauthorization. There's support for, customer experience from end to end. Instead of thinking about just the airline, like how do you make the whole process of getting to the airport, getting through security, not having to wait, using biometrics for your bag as an example. And so just drop your bag off instead of waiting in line so somebody can look at your ID just because a regulation was written 50 years ago that said you have to look at an ID, use your biometrics. And so I think it'll get easier and less uncertainty where what's happening. So I think the experience is just going to get smoother and smoother and smoother. But the basic idea of you'll go to an airport and buy a ticket and fly on an airplane that looks, like the airplanes today, I think it'll probably largely going to be the same.
Okay, all right. Well, I wish we had more time, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very
Joann.
much, Scott
Thank
Kirby.
you. Thank you. Okay.